kind of won't admit what fucking is quite categorically in the room. A fucking elephant. An elephant with a lot of rubles. Stinking of Newcastle brown ale. Anyway, aside from all that, I was just going to look at the whole zero seats thing. And this is something which kind of occurred to me. And I mean, zero seats, okay, zero seats came from Parvini, the de facto leader of the dissident right, as it is in 2024, which I believe is inarguable. Parvini is the de facto leader. Like, he is the line manager. He portrays himself, you know, it's incredible, isn't it? He genuinely kind of refers to himself, he refers to himself as the Alex Ferguson of that scene. Like, he's this kind of like stern, hard taskmaster that everyone fears. I mean, this is like, again, this is a guy who's 5 foot. Yeah, he claims 5'7". Apparently, there was some streamer, his wife shouted in the background, 5'6". This 5'6", podgy Iranian, like, he calls himself the Alex Ferguson of the scene. Like, you know, he's banging heads together. He's giving them the hairdryer. You know, he's pulling in his star striker and giving him a jib. I mean, it's just revolting level of narcissism. But further to that, could you imagine being like one of these, what he views as his underlings, kind of going along with this? I mean, Jesus, you're supplicating to a 5'6" Iranian. I don't think that's psychologically healthy on any level. Anyway, it's his movement. The zero seats thing. That's where it came from. Now, the reason why I'm looking at this again is because it did occur to me, if you want to be cynical, I mean, Russia, well, this is not really open for debate. Russia absolutely view the Labour Party as, well, less competent than the Conservatives. When they talk about the Anglo-Saxons, the evil Anglo-Saxons in London, what their primary kind of image of that, like the worst kind of case scenario for them, is the oldest sort of establishment. So if you've got the Labour Party, that's just a more malleable group for likes of the Russians, because they're more adjacent, well, basically communist, aren't they? Communist light. I mean, you got a guy, Starmer, he edited a Trotskyist magazine in the 1980s for 3 years. Now, I found that out on fucking, I don't know, Wikipedia before the election. So I don't see how any of these political great thought leaders wouldn't have been aware of this. Like, this is the guy that you're lobbying for. It's not hidden information, this, is it? You know what I mean? But anyway, this group are more malleable to the Russians. That's how the Russians view it. They view the Conservatives generally as being a bit more competent. So, in a nutshell, the Russians wanted Starmer in charge. And then you have academic agent Nima Parvini, multiple times he has appeared on the Duran, which is their flagship kind of active measures for the West, you know, aside from RT. It is basically RT. It's RT for the permanently online crowd. You know, I mean, it's RT correspondence. It just patently is. You know, you've got a guy like Makuris. You know, these are sort of neo-Bolsheviks, you know, dressed up in sheep's clothing. Anyway, Parvini has been sort of, you know, knocking about with this sort of group. And I think, as I said, I sort of making light of it. I was like, when you get on the Duran, you're kind of like made by that scene. You know, being made. Kind of is. And I think that's why he's jettisoned his little streaming gang. I think it's his, like, I can't be seen in the pizza parlour moment. And he basically thinks that he's above all this. And if he wants to be viewed by the likes of the Duran as a credible political kind of scientist, which is in his head he is, then, you know, you can't be knocking about with these sort of like anon accounts on the internet and streaming and, you know, prattling on for 3 hours. So now he's sort of totally changed his formats and he's kind of doing these I suppose editorial pieces. And I mean, I watched one. I just haven't got the patience to listen to much of his stuff. I watched one which he did about Niger, and you know, it's just pure like Putin is a 4D chess master, and he's like, you know, tucking up the West, like, you know, It's on message, let's put it that way. And I think he did one about like woke imperialism, and I just kind of like glanced through the transcript, because again, I find him such a difficult listen. I think he's objectionable character, sort of, you know, seeps from every pore, quite frankly, and I can't really listen to it for very long. But I did look through the transcript, and it just seemed again that it's kind of, you know, it's pushing that the sort of the West is this imperializing kind of woke kind of, you know, it's for everything bad, you know. And there are degrees of truth in all this. It's like all controlled opposition. They're not, you know, it's not going to be 100% drivel, because it wouldn't work, would it? There are some degrees of truth. However, again, it's multipolar stuff in a nutshell. To not labour the point, he's essentially promoting the multipolar, you know, world in opposition to all the batshit stuff. And when you look at active measures, when you look at and when you look at 0 seats, suddenly the sort of penny drops. Okay, this is a guy who's been on the Duran and is promoting Russian interests quite categorically, and I think wants to be viewed as a serious, credible figure within that milieu to receive funds, possibly donations. Maybe it's just ego. It's an interesting video actually by Nix GLV. Perhaps I'll link in the comment. It's on Odyssey, and he breaks it down. He breaks it down in a very interesting fashion. It's this is called mice. This is how you break it down when you look at people that get. This is called mice. Ideology, compromat, and ego. Now, I don't believe anyone in the dissident right, the sort of people I talk about, I don't think any of them would get compromated. I just don't think they're not, you know, they wouldn't bother. They don't need to. They're not high up enough for that. But I think there's a lot of money floating around, for sure. And I think there's ideology. And when I look at a guy like Parvini, I think Parvini scores very highly on the ego aspect of that. He just wants to be viewed as a big dog, because he's not a big dog, is he, in any way, shape or form. And so a guy like that, he wants, you know, he's insecure and narcissistic. And if he can garner kind of, you know, essentially status, well, he's desperate for it. So I think there's a large, he probably hits largest in the old ego, you know, channel on that score. But there's also ideology as well. The guy's Iranian. Like, his father's Iranian. He's got an entirely Iranian name. I mean, his father is an immigrant, an Iranian immigrant. Now, it seems that people in this dissident right scene seem very keen on remigration. Well, you know, I'm not saying if that's a good or bad thing, but these people are always talking, you know, they've all got to go back, all these immigrants that came. Well, his father came to England as an Iranian immigrant, married a British woman, and, you know, produced Iranian children, which he gave entirely Iranian names. I think Parvini mentioned that his brother's also got an Iranian name. You know, I think I've often wondered, like, if he was called, like, Reese Parvini, I really think his character would be substantially different. But, you know, he wasn't, was he? I was pals with a guy who was half Iranian years ago. He had a British name. He was just a British lad, basically, in all honesty. It was fine, there's nothing wrong with that, I don't think. Like, I guess I think his father came across after the Shah, all that stuff in the 70s. He was fine. Just a British lad. Okay, he's half Iranian, fine. But he didn't act like it. You know what I mean? Anyway, this is already getting into a ramble and far from the point. The point being is, if you view the whole 0 seats thing as an active measures to promote basically a government that the Russians would be keen on having, by a figure who is in this kind of Duran orbit and wants very much, I believe, to be viewed as a credible and useful man within that scene, is lobbying within that scene for prominence, then this whole 0 seats thing starts to make sense. Now, the key fact here with this 0 seats thing, this is about schismogenesis, as I said previously. This is about creating kind of antagonism, just social kind of disorder, because this kind of weakens your opponent. If he's got domestic issues at home, and just messing with the general discourse. This is basically what the Russians' main aim is, because they know that Starmer is still going to fulfill the British deep state's foreign objectives, because you could put in Lester Piggott and he would do the same thing. They're all going to do that. They understand that. But what they'll get with Starmer is they'll get more opportunity for sort of schismogenesis at home. And as I said previously, people like Tommy Robinson, they're paid agitators, and they get in and they kind of, ruffle feathers. And essentially, I think the dissident right fulfill the same function for them. Yeah, okay, maybe it's a slightly, less high status, but essentially the same thing. Another short man, Tommy Robinson. Why are they all short? All these people, dissident right figures, they're all short. Anyway, moving on from that. The point being is, if you look at the behavior, again, it all comes down to, this is behavioral analysis, essentially. And if you look at the behavior of the dissident right, they promoted 0 seats. They talked of nothing else for basically 3 months, Parvini more. And now look at their behaviour once Starmer got into power. It's all like, okay, we did 0 seats, and now we're attacking Starmer. Now we go on the attack. And there's these clever little tweets, which they think is clever, between Morgoth and his line manager there. And it reveals themselves. This is the tactic now. This is the frame we use. Aren't we clever? This will be this is the next stage in the operation. Here is our framing. Ha ha ha, we're so clever. We framed boomers as these, wretched, self-interested figures, prior to the election, self-interested, fancy that. But, now we're portraying them as wounded sparrows that need to be, protected by the state. Again, they just reveal their hand, because they're not that clever, fundamentally, but they are very high on themselves. So I think in this, and in their subsequent behaviour, they revealed, the motivation. You follow the Kremlin's objectives. Now, this is supposition. It is inarguable the Kremlin want Starmer in charge. They did their bit, whatever you think of that, to put Starmer in charge. They had some effect, whatever that might be. And now he's in charge, it's all about attack, 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 attack. Well, this is just textbook kind of Kremlin operation. And I don't know, maybe people can't see this. Maybe people don't want to see this, whatever. Maybe you just want to listen to your favourite streamer once or twice a week, talk about films and be your imaginary friend. I don't give a fuck. If that's what you want to do it. But don't be under any illusions about who these people are. Because they are selling out British nationalism. They are selling out Britain and the British people to a foreign power. They are pretending to represent British nationalism, but the only thing they represent is their own avarice. And they're taking money and doing the bidding for a hostile foreign power which is ethnically cleansing Europe. When they, as I said, they will never talk about that because they're on wages, or they're trying to solicit funding. As I said, I don't have bank statements, but if you have a logical mind and you can look at what these people are doing, then I don't think you really need to be guided through it. It's there for you, right? It's not because there's no smoking guns, no bank statements, but just look at their behaviour.